These walls predate the dungeon by untold millennia, but the traps were undeniably recent. This ancient ghoul's state of decay was incredible. It was nothing short of miraculous that it could still move. The necromantic spell that bound its soul could only slow its decomposition, not stop it. An unspeakably terrible fate. Anki could sense that the insect-like creature had devoted itself wholeheartedly to the god of the depths, and molted its human skin as a result. Anki could feel Almer's presence. It was especially strong here. A mystery worth investigating, but it could wait for now. Despite its derelict state, the city of the gods did not fail to impress. It was immeasurably vast, a world unto itself. One could explore for an entire lifetime and still never see it all. The figurine could move and speak. Whether or not it was alive was up for debate. It was severely damaged, missing its entire lower half, to say nothing of the chips, cracks, and deep gouges. If broken into 1,000 pieces or ground into powder, would it continue to have self-awareness? The city was restored, or rather they had slipped away to another time in the distant past. Perhaps it was merely an illusion, a vision of the past, just an echo of the glory of Mahabra. Before them stood a rusty mockery of the female form, a metal shell that housed warped flesh and a false womb. The tiny deformed infant began to writhe and grow at a phenomenal rate. Anki could perceive a strange air about the pitiful being, like a divine spark that had been debased and bastardized. Regenwalder decided to cut out the root of the problem before it could grow. The odd figurine did not mind that they helped themselves to his excess stock after Regnvaldr's enormous purchase. The city was both bustling and empty, as if living vestiges of the past and future phased in and out of reality, and walked side by side with their motley crew through the twisted streets. Anki's interest was piqued by the pit of enlightenment the vestiges were entering, but that too could wait for later. The rather small figurine resembled the broken-down guardian of the king's gate, and his ambition confirmed it. The strange stone that made up his body could grow and change as any other living being, but that interesting fact was overshadowed by more pressing implications. They truly were experiencing the past in a tangible way. Regnvaldr was rather eager to meet face to face with Ron Chambara, the Tormented One, but it would be wise to appease the floating head first. By all accounts, this thing chained to the wall was dead. It did not breathe, nor did its oversized exposed heart beat, but Regnvaldr was suspicious of it, nonetheless. These grooves are stained with long-dried blood. Their purpose was evident to both Anki and Regnvaldr. The new gods claimed to herald a new world order, free of the cruelties of the past, but they wanted the very same thing as the old ones: blood. Their hypocrisy infuriated Regnvaldr down to his core. The agonized cries of the mutilated giant were both deafening and maddening. Regnvaldr to ease its suffering, and theirs alike. Anki was familiar with the teachings of Chambara. The Tormented One espoused that suffering was the purest form of inspiration, and that the infliction of suffering was itself the most beautiful form of art. By that principle, the Red Man was a masterpiece. Enki was the master of all insects, not just the small ones, although that did not extend to arachnids. Even if Regenwalder had a few extra hands laying around to break the magic seal, he had his doubts that the dog, the floating ego, or the priest could effectively wield it. These bodies are calcified and rigid, another cruel fate. Even if the pompous head was not pleased with the results, the strange device could prove useful. If not directly led, the husk just wanders aimlessly. It lacked Regenwalder's scars and battle-hardened physique, but it did share his likeness otherwise, although it appeared younger than the original. Even though it did not resist or even flinch when the rusty chains pierced its flesh, and despite its seeming lack of a mind altogether, Regenwalder did feel guilty as he turned the wheels. He was able to quickly push those feelings away by assuming it would gradually calcify, like the multitude of other husks below, sparing it from a worse fate. Regenwalder was disappointed with the new god's lackluster performance. Surely gods were made of sterner stuff than this. The amount of blood flowing from the sacrificed husk was absolutely staggering. Surely 1,000 husks would be required to produce this. The Tormented One had a commanding presence, unlike before. If a god could bleed, then it could be poisoned. The caustic liquid seared Chambara's flesh, but he seemed to enjoy it in a perverse way. The barbed wheels of torment appeared to be metal, but they moved in an unnatural and flexible way. Enki theorized that the wheels themselves were a part of Chambara, a notion he would put to the test. Some of the Tormented One's blood began hovering in the air and coalescing before crystallizing into a crimson stone. It briefly glows with a blue aura before gently drifting to Regenwalder's outstretched hand. It has a hefty weight compared to the other soul stones. Now that they were somewhat rested, Kahara recalled seeing a raggedy old doll in one of the cells. But the strange thing was, the arrangement of the cells and the walkways are not as he remembered. He convinces himself that he simply misremembered. It was ungodly dark here after all. All of that aside, Kahara was glad to see the girl happy. The floor and walls of the dark corridor the alchemist had peered down during his speech were odd. They were soft and trembled ever so slightly. It was off-putting to say the least. Darcy noticed a cube shape opening in the gateway. It couldn't just be a coincidence. These primeval statues and architecture, they must be related to Mahabra. Kahara could practically taste the riches that lie ahead. The rusty locks were child's play to open, leaving plenty of time to avoid the ghouls that were crawling out of the woodwork. But there was not enough time to both dodge the undead and loot the tomb. Even with no head, the ghoul flailed and thrashed. It still twitched a little even after being fully dismembered. This space was completely incomprehensible. There were towers and structures taller than the distance they had traveled underground. But even more inconceivable was that there was sky above those towers. Kahar was visibly disappointed. This was not the Mahabra they had seen before. Hopefully there was gold and jewels to find that could stand the test of time better than these moldy books. The broken statue's head followed them, watching their every step. It'd be wise to stay out of reach. This unnatural creature's massive bladed arms could cleave any one of them in two, but it had a glaring weakness. Whoever managed to strike first would win. This monster's uncanny grin was disturbing, but it was nothing compared to the overwhelming stench. Swarms of flies buzzed around it, and maggots could be seen wriggling in its filthy matted fur. Kahara wasn't thrilled with the idea of backtracking all the way back again, but he would regret abandoning a damsel in distress, and he could see that Darcy would not approve leaving her behind either. Regenwälder thought it unlikely that he'd be able to pull Enki away from these books, at least not for a while. He was not particularly interested in reading right now, not with the unpleasant sounds coming from upstairs. Moonless was feeling uneasy, and Regenwälder knew why. He could feel it too. They were being watched. The disgusting gremlins devouring their mother sent shivers up Regenwalder's spine. Unpleasant memories of the doomed voyage to Vinland began bubbling up. After a few months adrift on the open sea, many had succumbed to starvation, and many more were driven to cannibalism by the maddening hunger. Although that was nothing compared to what had waited for them on Vinland's shore. These hideous little monsters were as resilient as they were bloodthirsty. Leaving them to fully mature would be a mistake. There would be no telling how powerful they would become. These words stuck with Regenwalder. He could already tell this place had changed him somehow. At first, Regenwalder was just guessing, but after fiddling with the mechanism, he was able to feel slightly more resistance, changing a mannequin whenever it was already in the right position. Valtiel, the Enlightened One's voice cracked like thunder in Enki's and Regenwalder's minds. He assured them that his time had only just begun, and that they could not replace him. He boasted that he was too wise and powerful to fall to mere mortals, and a pathetic shell of a new god like Nasra. But while Valtiel stroked his ego, Enki's poison took hold, weakening him and leaving him vulnerable to Regenwalder's brutal onslaught. Like Chambara before him, a severed mass of Valtiel's brain condensed into an amber stone containing his enlightened soul. Enki could tell at a glance the library had not been properly maintained. Very disappointing. Enki sensed that this unsightly thing was a powerful practitioner of blood magic. He would not give it a chance to cast a single spell. It was a strange situation. Darcy had doubted the wounded knight's words about the Crown Prince personally traveling to these dungeons, but stranger things have happened. It's not impossible that a royal would want to personally meet with the captain overseeing a prisoner as important as Lagarde. No doubt they expected a functioning prison and not hell itself. Kahara, while not pleased with the detour, was pleased with the reward, and he knew just how to spend it. You have to spend money to make money. Isaiah may not have been so eager to part with these maps if he knew about Mahabra. The crow, again, how did it always find them? Enki was fascinated that the god of the depths' influence could transform separate individuals in similar ways. Regenwalder was not nearly as curious. It was the figurine that guarded the city. Perhaps it could shed some light on what happened to Mahabra. The towering construct slammed Regenwalder with enough force to crush an ordinary man into a bloody pulp. But he was no longer an ordinary man. Strengthened with the souls of mighty warriors, monsters, and even gods, Regenwalder was able to shrug off the old guardian's devastating blows. Kahara's maps were rather esoteric. As near as he could tell, they needed to locate a few landmarks. Large steps, a large swine, and 3 urns. This was a great investment. Strange jewels and nearly as much silver as they had spent. These ancient coins may be even more valuable than their modern counterparts. Darcy realized that the relic Lagarde claimed from Oldegard would fit in this unusual device, just like the entrance to Mahabra. Things were becoming clearer now. Leading up to the Oldegard campaign, Lagarde had become distant, often sequestering himself away. He had become obsessed with history, old gods, and the occult. It must have been so he could find this city. But what did he seek here? Another hairy beast. Kahara could smell it long before he could see it, and had no intention of taking another one head on. The blue sword for just a second burst into roaring flames. Much to Kahara's surprise, the flames did not harm him in any way, but it set the horrid beast ablaze. Hard to believe, but the smell had become even worse. It was a miracle that everyone did not immediately vomit. The amazing otherworldly blade was even more astonishing than they had realized. Perhaps with practice, the flames could be controlled. That was the largest spider Kahara had ever seen, but it was still just small enough to fit underfoot. Another peculiar jewel. There's no telling just how many more valuables were waiting to be claimed. That stench. This place is overrun with these foul, loathsome things. On top of that, this one seems even stupider and uglier than the others. At least these festering hairballs were sluggish and dim-witted. For a long while now, the voice of his friends and comrades whispered in his ears, telling him that if not for him, they would still be alive. Had he just fought with them, had he not run away and abandoned them like a coward, they would be with their families now. What could he say? It was true after all. Another slain dragon? This one is smaller, but looks just like the ones from the fairy tales. Could all mythical beasts be real? Truly, they had left the world they knew behind the moment they stepped foot in the dungeon. Nothing would be the same anymore. This man had been crushed, and all of his limbs are mangled and broken. The work of those unpleasant-smelling brutes, no doubt. Kahara was ready to move on, but Darcy was completely engrossed in the dusty old manuscripts. Based on the repulsive stench in this room, something here must have been rotting for days. But upon closer inspection, the blood was fresh. Regenwalder now knew someone had come to Mahabra besides them. But the god of the depths' parasitic flowers were far more concerning. Its corruption had consumed most of the city. Regenwalder had a great respect for the city's guardian, but he also pitied him and his lack of will to change his own fate. The two parties met on friendly terms and spent a short while exchanging information. Anki quickly came to the conclusion they had been transported to another realm and were not merely dreaming. This had to be the work of Nilvan, but why had she only now decided to act? And why had she only taken the four of them and not the others? Enki adjusted his gloves. He could still feel the pain from the nails. After viewing himself receiving the very visions that led him to these dungeons from an outside vantage, he was beginning to suspect Nilvan had manipulated him into coming here. Originally he had believed Almir had sent the visions, but now it seemed most likely that Nilvan, the Endless One, had sent them instead. Had she also influenced the others to come here? It was a pleasant memory, but Kahara much rather see the real Celeste. Darcy now understood why Kahara was willing to risk life and limb in this dark hellhole. She was touched by his love for Celeste. The child probably isn't even his, but regardless, he still came here for them. This feeling, those eyes, it's the thing in the cat mask. Kahara could not understand. He did not want to understand. How? How was he here? Where even was here? Kahara was frozen in terror. His companions were gone. Everything was gone. It was just him and the cat. Kahara knew this couldn't be real. He wasn't even in the real Rondon. Yeah, that's it. It's not real. 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 Kahara, after taking a deep breath, begins to calm down again. Silently, he prayed to whatever god would listen, to never run into that thing again. Regenwalder broke into a cold sweat at the plague doctor's words. Why? Why didn't he toss the cursed relic into the sea? This was all Regenwalder could think about as he relived the worst day of his life. Had he not listened to the Jarl and tossed the cube over the side of the ship, this could have been prevented. I could have prevented this. I am responsible for this. Regenwalder kept repeating these words over and over in his head. His past self was right. This was unforgivable, and there was plenty of blame to go around. Anki and Regenwalder both instinctively knew a new god when they saw it, even in the guise of an old woman. Kahara and Darcy lacked the first-hand experience with the new gods that they had, but trusted their judgment. The old woman locked eyes with Regenwalder before unfolding into a massive articulated killing machine. He knew what this form was. The Skin Granny, a creature of folklore from the northern lands, said to haunt dreams and visit retribution upon those who fail to uphold their familial obligations. As the master of this dream world, Nilvan could have assumed any form, but she donned the mantle of the Skin Granny. Regenwalder knew she meant to attack him mentally and not just physically. But as powerful and intimidating as Nilvan had become, she was quickly losing ground. As if fate guided their hands, instinct took over. These four mortals moved in sync like a well-oiled machine. Anyone could have been fooled into believing they had been comrades many years and not strangers. With Enki's support, Darcy's stalwart defenses rendered the Skin Granny's attacks impotent, while Ragnvaldr and Kahara ruthlessly dismembered and burned her. Nilvan never stood a chance. With the last of her strength, Nilvan unveiled one last vision. Darcy was mortified as she helplessly relived this cherished moment. Her heart was ripped out all over again. If only she could see him, hear his real voice again. Now knowing the role she played in his clan's destruction, Ragnvaldr felt much satisfaction having slain the Endless One. He did not understand what she meant by her child or the heart of darkness, but certainly he did not owe that wretched new god any favors, and had no intention of helping her. As Ragnvaldr regained consciousness, he clutched a gemstone as blue and beautiful as the endless sky. Darcy and Ragnvaldr both had mixed feelings about their shared history. Ragnvaldr respected that she assisted in killing Nilvan, whom he considered the true orchestrator of the massacre. While she was against Lagard's campaign in Oldegard, she was still complicit and followed his orders. But by that measure, he was also complicit in the Jarl's orders to bring the cube to Oldegard. Darcy, on the other hand, felt guilty and loathed her own hypocrisy. Had the roles been reversed, she doubted that she could show Ragnvaldr's restraint. If nothing else, slaying her in front of the child she was caring for would leave a bad taste in his mouth. In the short time they were together, Enki had sensed a curious aura around the young girl. After Regenwalder told him what Nilvan had said to him, Enki began to draw a connection. The possibilities of her significance were beginning to enthrall him. After seeing what Kahar was here for, she wanted him and the girl to get out before it was too late. Darcy, on the other hand, had unfinished business, and no one was waiting for her on the outside. She had found a new goal, but there was much to learn and do. She wasn't sure where to begin. Darcy had far more than 3 questions, but this was an invaluable opportunity. Darcy did not know if this unknown pantheon's knowledge was infallible, or even if they were telling the truth, but armed with this knowledge she could move forward. If Lagard's prophecy was false, then there was a chance, but she would need help. Kahar immediately felt Darcy's absence. She was a strong ally, and without her, this place was that much more perilous. All the more reason to find the next buried treasure and get out. It didn't make any sense. This had to be the spot. But the stones are undisturbed and too difficult to remove. The last map was correct. It stands to reason that this one would be also. Then it dawned on him. He was too far in the past. The treasure had not been hidden here yet. He needed to find the man from Oldegard with the magic cube to return to the present. Kahar was so excited that he had returned to Mahabra in all of its former glory that he had not thought this through. Darcy knew she needed to speak with Enki again, but would need to avoid direct confrontation with Regenwalder. Darcy had bested countless men in single combat, but she knew that he was no ordinary man. Far from it. He moved like lightning and wielded two otherworldly blades. It was safe to say he was a monster more terrifying than any she had encountered in these cursed dungeon walls, that new god included. She needed to bide her time and glean what she could on her own, and hope that he and Enki parted ways. Although Nasra scoffed, he was looking forward to spitting in the faces of the new gods residing there. Regenwalder was fascinated by the long-dead dragon. He wondered if he was the one to slay it later in the past, though he quickly gave up on trying to understand how time moved in Mahabra. Enki wasn't sure which disgusted him more, this thing's repellent smell and appearance, or yet another misuse of Sylvian's marriage rite. Enki had become well acquainted with Valtiel's numerous unsuccessful attempts at creating life during his time in the Great Library. This beast stood out as a particularly terrible example of a failed experiment. It was dim-witted, slow, and the odor. But its most glaring flaw was the complete lack of a soul. This was better than anything Enki had imagined. 3 direct answers from a seemingly endless collective of new gods was an incredible boon. However, he really only needed 2 currently. Both Enki and Nasra were very pleased with the outcome of this brief excursion. Like his older brother before him, the unnamed figurine could now rest. This decrepit old man bared little resemblance to the depictions of the dominating one found in books or his idols. It would appear that as his power and influence waned, he had taken up dog breeding to pass the time. The god of the depth's flesh had spread even to the golden temple of the king. It was no wonder that Mahabra's sun no longer illuminated the city. It had been blotted out by the god of darkness. Regenwalder did not comprehend what he had just set in motion. The cogs of fear and hunger could no longer be slowed or stopped. The Temple of the King in all of its glory was rather breathtaking. It was likely the greatest monument to man's hubris in all of existence. Regenwalder quickly overcame the feelings of inferiority that the dominating one instilled. He was just another new god. He would fall like the rest. Francois's mocking would be returned in kind. Regenwalder no longer had anything to fear from a weak so-called god such as him. Regenwalder blitzed the pompous false god with inhuman speed, severing both of his arms before he could even react. Francois's strange metallic body showed no signs of pain. He was seemingly unfazed by the brutal wounds inflicted with the black steel of the East, Enki's poison, or Nashra's powerful flames. A fatal flaw. Had he felt the pain of these grievous injuries, Francois may have exercised caution, or fought more desperately. He was already dead. He just hadn't realized it yet. Molten silver and gold flowed like blood from Francois's mutilated corpse. The two metals swirled and mixed into a magnificent perfect sphere and drifted slowly to Regenwalder just as the others had. The Fellowship's influence on mankind had been erased, just like the new gods before them, leaving a void to be filled and history itself in flux. The howling giant posed no challenge. Regenwalder would grant the tortured creature a swift, merciful death. Regenwalder had slain all the false gods and monsters that stood in his way, and claimed their dark souls for himself. He even tore the heart of darkness itself asunder. But there was one last thing to do. There was still a small, pathetic creature whose fate he had taken an interest in, lurking about these dungeons. Regenwalder had misjudged this man. Though he discarded his humanity, he did not become a monster. Instead, he became something rather beautiful. The butterfly may be an outlier, an exception to the rule, but Regenwalder was inspired by it, a lesson he would take to heart. His time in the dungeons had changed him. Regenwalder knew he could no longer live life as an ordinary man. Like the butterfly, he had cast off his humanity in the dungeons of fear and hunger. What emerged from that cursed place was not Regenwalder, but rather the god of ultra-violence.